the Colorado Healing Fund, try to sort of discuss why we were created, what we do, and how we're responding to the Club Q shooting. So I'm going to pass it off to Cynthia Kaufman, who is our board chair, and Steve Siegel has also joined us, who is a member of our board of trustees as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Jordan. Jordan Finnegan is our executive director, the one and only executive director that we've had at the Colorado Healing Fund since we began our work in 2018. We know that there are a lot of questions that you have about what the Healing Fund does, and we're going to allow time for everyone to raise a hand and ask a question. But we thought it would be helpful. We wrote down some of the questions that we've heard repeatedly, and we wanted to respond to those in some comments before we start. Maybe we can take a question off your list, and then we'll turn to question and answer. I'm Cynthia Kaufman. I was Colorado Attorney General from 2015 to 2019. I retired from state government after I left office, and so that is no longer a position that I hold. I am a volunteer who chairs the board of the Colorado Healing Fund because I believe so much in what we do. A word about how we established the Healing Fund. It was created as a result of experiences of a number of experts in Colorado, folks who didn't necessarily intend to be experts in responding to mass tragedy, but who became so because Colorado, as we know, has been the scene for a number of mass tragedies over the years. And we wanted to create a place where we could collect donations in a secure manner after a mass tragedy, and then quickly disperse funds through trusted partners in local communities to distribute that money. That was the idea. It sounds simple in the mission. The execution, I know, has caused some of you to ask questions about why we do what we do. It was a very thoughtfully created model, and a personal experience that I had brought home to me the need for something like the Colorado Healing Fund. After the shooting at Planned Parenthood in Colorado Springs in November of 2015, I reached out to some folks in the community who were responding, including the director of the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance, just to see if there was anything we could do right away to be helpful. And that evening of the shooting, we actually ended up taking a collection among some of the senior staff in the AG's office to buy a plane ticket for the college-age son of one of the police officers who was injured in that shooting. He needed to get home. He needed to be with his father. And there wasn't a quick way to secure a plane ticket for him. So we made that purchase, and it led to a conversation that continued for the next 2 or 3 years with KUSA, with the experts that we brought together who have been part of mass tragedies, to say, we think there's a gap here in having an established place where people can donate funds after a mass tragedy, and then we can quickly turn those around and get them out to the organizations and local communities that are serving victims. We made a conscious decision not to be direct service providers because there are people who have that ability and expertise and training in Colorado who are already doing that work. And there was no need to duplicate services that were working. What we didn't have was a place to have funds waiting for the event of a tragedy, and to essentially be the bank that collected funds if people wanted to donate in that way. We met over a couple of year period. We were very thoughtful and intentional about our decisions about what we were going to do. And in 2017, the Las Vegas Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting happened in early 2017. We invited a representative from the Nevada Attorney General's office to come and talk to us about the response, because it was the most recent one to a major shooting. And we wanted to know what lessons they had learned and what they would advise us in establishing the Healing Fund. And we found out a few things. We found out Las Vegas did not have any established way for people to make contributions. And they wished very much that they had had a Colorado Healing Fund. They said that they had formed a committee of 16 volunteers, and it took them about 4 months to establish the organization and make distributions to victims of that tragedy. In contrast, by way of contrast, the Healing Fund has been able to get money out within a day of the shootings in Colorado Springs at Club Q. And I think that shows the importance of having something in place that can help victims. Finally, we seeded the fund with a donation from the Attorney General's office from lawsuit settlement funds. That was the initial funding for the Colorado Healing Fund. However, we are not a government organization. We don't receive any other federal or state funding. And so we are like other nonprofits that raise money and operate, as you will hear, we think a lean budget so that we can provide services and provide money, to the service providers in the local community. That's enough from me. Steve Siegel or Jordan, who is going to take over for me?
Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for talking about our history. I appreciate you going into that. So one of the concerns that we've heard from the community is about our admin fees. So in the past, we've tried to fund ourselves without this 10% fee, and we fall within a very specific niche that we haven't been able to get state funding or federal funding at this moment. And also with a lot of foundations, we don't fall within their grant making space. So we've had to find new ways for us to be able to get funding. And it has come to having to take a fee at times while we're responding to an event. That part of that is because we also are here to respond to events. That is our purpose. We are here not just right away, but in the long term as well. But we also wanted to say, well, the other piece is that we wanted to let everyone know that, as Cynthia talked about, our budget is very lean. Us taking a fee is just helping us to be able to secure that we are here while we continue to respond to these tragedies. Our budget is about $130,000 a year. And so that is basically salary for one staff person, our annual audit that we ensure that we go through, and other small miscellaneous things that a usual nonprofit has to account for. But we did want to say that by this morning, we did have someone come forward saying that they could very likely underwrite our admin fees. So we'll have some more information on that soon. We don't have that finalized by any means, but we did want to let you all know that. So I think next we want to talk about, Steve wants to talk about why we don't give money directly to victims and why we don't give it all at once. So Steve, if you could talk about that. Steve, you're on mute. Yeah.
Historically, this work started showing itself in the early 80s, which is when I got my training shortly before being deployed out to the San Ysidro McDonald's shootings in California. And this has now been, I think I read an article the other day that we've had 600 in the last calendar year. And so it's become a very different challenge for people across the country. One thing that is true, though, for all of these cases is that we learned early on and continue to use this as a guidepost to how we operate. that there are 3 steps to our work in coming together with victims and survivors to get them to a place of beginning to be able to focus on a path to healing. And that is, the first phase is safety and security. And I think that's somewhat self-explanatory, that people have got to find a safe place to be in so many ways, not just the physical safety of that night at the club, but safety going forward. Trauma professionals will tell you that this sense of fear and anxiety is something that is can be quite debilitating and can last for quite a while. So safety and security is our #1 step. In the course of that, we're determining individuals' needs through the victim advocates who are on the ground. And those victim advocates are from their community, from the Colorado geographic community, in this case, Colorado Springs. And the second step is to give victims a chance to ventilate and validate what they're feeling. The things that go through the mind of a recent trauma victim, especially one of this nature, are, we don't have enough time today to list them all, and the mental health professionals can put you through a multiple-hour course to understand those complexities. But people have real things going through their heads. What if, what am I going to do about? How am I going to handle this? How are my children going to be affected? Those kinds of things, when they express themselves, they need to be validated for what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and also help to think through practical solutions in the face of this unbelievably overwhelming event. And then finally, which speaks to how we give out funds, is to predict and prepare. This is not over with when the press stops covering it. It's not over with when if an offender is still alive, goes to trial and the trial is over. And as those of you who know, in Colorado Springs, in your Planned Parenthood case, that offender has yet to come to trial, and it's, I think, in excess of 7 years. So there's a back end of all of this where needs are also unpredictable, but very real. And so it's been our position from day one that we want to have resources to address the needs that are stated to us through trained professionals in the community, what your needs are now, what they will be tomorrow, and what they will be down the road. Those things are core to our mission. And it is difficult to anticipate what that might be. One example I could give you is a system they used back in Boston after the marathon bombings, where the determination of how to distribute funds was, let's get them out based on who died and how many nights they spent in the hospital. Well, a lot of people came to the hospitals that day and that evening unable to hear. And they were told to go home. This is a function of the blast that they were near, and their eardrums would accommodate, and over the course of 30, 60, 90 days, their hearing would start to return. Lo and behold, that was not the case. Many of those people were deaf, and all of the funds had been distributed already without account for that population of people. So that's just a small example of one of the complexities that can go on in an individual event, and we are going to have them in Colorado Springs as well. In my time, and having gone to Columbine and Aurora and Sandy Hook and Virginia Tech and 9/11 and more, I have never seen an event that looks like a clone of another event. They're unique. The people are unique. The cultures of folks, the lifestyle, every way you want to look at a human existence can have a uniqueness. as we come across these events across our country and across the world.
Thank you, Steve. So one thing that we also want to talk about, practically speaking, is we are currently collecting donations up until 6 months after the incident occurs. We have to recognize that if the community is still feeling called to donate, which is always an incredible and humbling thing, we can't just be collecting the money and then giving it out right away, because there is no final number until that 6-month point. So we have to think about that practically as well. And then also we recognize that, particularly with the Club Q event, there are some injuries, and I know that there's some folks who are still in the hospital, and we have to be very aware of what those ramifications will be for those individuals down the line. There have been times where they still come looking for support 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. I know that there are people from Columbine who have come forward looking for support as well. So we're hoping to plan for that, depending on the amount of money that has come in from donations. And then from that, I want to talk about also the fact that all of the money that comes in for an activation, as we call it, that 6-month period, whatever comes in for Club Q is for Club Q. Whatever came in for Boulder is for Boulder. There's no money that's being shifted between the different incidents. We want to make sure to honor donor intent at all times. And that's very critical for us as a nonprofit, but also as someone who's responding to a mass tragedy. So then next, we want to talk about how critical it is that CHF is here now and that we're getting money out now. What's important, and what Cynthia talked about earlier, is that we have this seed fund. The seed fund is what allows us to, after we officially activate, begin to assess how many donations are coming in, but begin to get money out right away. Typically what happens is when a donation comes in, it takes about 30 days for that donation to hit someone's bank account. But with us, with having the seed fund, we can recognize sort of the rate at which donations are coming in, make an assessment based upon talking to the victim advocates on the ground, talking with the individuals who have experienced this tragedy, and get money out as soon as possible. With Club Q, we want to say we made an additional disbursement this week. So far there have been $220,000 in direct cash disbursements to the 24 individuals who are injured and the 5 families. We have confirmed with the victim advocates that that money has gotten to those individuals, except for the additional people who were named as injured in this last week. And then $150,000 has gone out to support any immediate needs. And that has covered car payments, some funeral costs in addition, outside of what victims' compensation can cover. It will be covering rent, wages, lost, utilities, and more. So that money is already supporting victims of this tragedy. And lastly, we also want to say that we don't talk about the specifics of the amount of cash disbursements that we give to individuals, because that's a breach of victim confidentiality. We want to ensure that individuals who receive any support are feeling safe, and that they have the ability to let anyone know that, but that's not our role. So Steve, could you talk a little bit about how we were created to fill gaps, and particularly with those immediate needs that we just gave out, that money that I just mentioned that we gave out, that fills a gap very much so in this immediate incident, but also there are gaps that we have identified in that intermediate space and in the long-term space. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Sure. Again, this starts with a realization that each victim and victim family is unique, and their needs are unique, their economic needs are unique. And I also want to add to that, that some of what we are able to distribute is in fact not cash, but in fact are in-kind donations that are made. I know so far we have 20 or more donated round-trip air tickets for victims to bring in people for support. We've had donations of other kinds of travel necessities. We've had lodging donated, and we've had food donated. I think the classic food story was in the aftermath of the Oklahoma bombing trials. We had food brought by the community every day of those trials. But we want to connect, and the victims world, the victims professional world wants to connect a victim with someone who can ascertain what their needs are and then explore how to get those resources. And so they come to us and tell us that this family needs support with, maybe their funeral costs are going to be over the allotted amount from victim comp. Maybe it's how to feed the family in the interim in this time. Maybe they don't feel safe going back to their house. Maybe they have coming car payments or loan payments or any other kind of bill. We're coming on winter. We're going to have, certainly we're going to have utilities that have to be addressed. We look at things in the social work world. They talk about Maslow's triangle of hierarchy of triangle. So you start on the bottom with food and shelter and clothing and those kinds of things. And then you move up and you take care of your social responsibilities and your familial responsibilities. And you move up that ladder and you start getting to the issues of how you feel emotionally or don't feel emotionally. And then you overlay the realities of your circumstance. And that could be the criminal justice system involvement. It could be my place of work is no longer a place of work. It needs so much repair before I could possibly go back there. So you're dealing with things like lost wages. Or it could be just that it's the things that emanate from the psychological trauma that was created by this event. I just don't feel like I can concentrate on what used to be my job. I just don't feel like I want to live anymore. It runs the gamut of, and we can call it gaps in service, but what it really is an opportunity to get a relationship developed the best way possible with the people that were harmed and find out from their perspective what their needs are. Government programs, victim comp, those kinds of things may require you to fit into a little box. That's not who we are. We want to fit into the box that you call your world and deliver a service that way. And that's what's in the process of going on in a community that already has expressed its sense that they don't feel connected to traditional paths that we take in the criminal justice system, whether it's law enforcement or prosecution or government-based services or anything like that. So we have to meet people where they are. And in meeting them where they are, we can hear from them. We don't tell them, we hear from them what their needs are. And that's what we come back and try to fund through our partners on the ground.
Thanks, Steve. One of the things too I want to talk about is that what's really critical in us hearing from them though is that we are working directly with those service providers who are working with those victims. We want to make sure that we are not mission creeping into what those victim advocates are doing. So it's really critical that we have that relationship. One of the other things I wanted to talk about too is that practically speaking, we work very closely with victims' compensation and the folks who are filling out the federal grants to understand where those grants cover things and those funding sources cover different needs. And that's where we figure out where we can help fill in those gaps to support those families, survivors, people who were immediately impacted by this tragedy. One of the things that I think about is with the Denver Lakewood shooting that happened at the end of last year, we helped cover long-term housing for one of the families that came in for one of the injured. I think that that is critical, and it wouldn't have been covered by any other funding source if the Colorado Healing Fund didn't exist. We didn't collect that much for that tragedy, so we got out as much as there was as quickly as we could and supported as many people as we could. And then we want to talk about why we choose the organizations that we choose to work with. First of all, I want to say that with the organizations that we have been giving through, with whether it's KUSA or mental health partners, they do not take any admin fee. So that's really critical in us getting that money out and supporting those individuals. With KUSA, what's critical for us with an organization that we're working with to get the money out is that they have a staff and they have the ability to take this money and get it out quickly. They have an infrastructure. We want to make sure that they are a trusted resource within the community, and that they have relationships with the victims that they're distributing the money to. That's very critical. With KUSA, at least the way that process goes is that individuals just have to fill out a very short form. They don't have to show any bank statements or anything. It's very simple. And we try to make it as simple as possible, at least on our end, but in the organizations that we're working with. It is critical that people are able to get the support that they need as fast as possible. I think, Steve, do you have anything else to add on top of that?
Well, it's so important that these advocates, again, build these relationships, because there are complexities within the families or the friends of the people who are harmed. It could be divorce. It could be a separation of their relationship. It could be fiscal things that have been directed by the court. There are things that every family has that is unique to that family, and that's what we want to take into account. We don't want to tell anyone, and will not tell anyone what they should do or how they should do it, but we certainly need to listen and hear from them about how these funds can best assist them here and now. In many ways, it goes back to a concept that was established by the head of the Denver Police Department Victim Assistance Program, and his teachings to his staff were, the first question is, please tell me what I can do for you now, today. And that is at the essence of what we're asking, and why we're so desperate to build relationships with this community that is unique, has great concerns about how traditional things are done, and yet they still have the same set of needs as victims of mass tragedies across the country in so many ways, and then a set of unique needs that we're all learning about.
Yeah, and one of the critical things that we're doing right now in order to help address that is we are engaging with folks in the LGBTQ+ community, and we're working on building an advisory committee that will help to inform us on that going forward. So as that continues to get formed, we'll keep you all updated on that. Also, so Steve, real quick, did you want to discuss our relationship with the OVC toolkit and the NMDC?
Yeah, and I think Jordan will make these links available to you sometime after we finish. There is a national center that was established by the U.S. Department of Justice at the University of South Carolina Medical School. That is the Mass Tragedy Victims Resource Center. The exact name will be available to you. And the Department of Justice also funded professional victim advocates from across the country who have responded to some of the major events that we've seen over the last decades. And they created, with the help of colleagues across the country, a toolkit to help every community build the capacity to respond. Those two reference documents will give you an idea of the foundation of why the Healing Fund sees things the way they do and why we do things the way that we do. That's it, George.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I will provide that in the chat in just a minute. So lastly, as we're sort of wrapping this up, we wanted to just note our emphasis on financial transparency. So first of all, we said earlier that part of our administrative costs go to help us have an audit, a yearly audit, which we pay for. And that helps to ensure us that we are on the up and up, that donations are accounted for, and that auditor is there in order to help keep us accountable. We do that yearly. And then also we have a quarterly report that we do after large incidents. And it has, for Boulder, we have put up these quarterly reports, and then it's turned into a biannual recently. So the next one will go up after the end of this year. I will put a link to that as well. And that really helps to demonstrate the donations that have come in and how they're going out, sort of the breakdown of their distribution, as I explained earlier with Club Q. So I will link to both of those in this chat as well, right after this.
Just one thing I want to add. This is not founded in someone's opinion or someone had this experience, so let's do it everywhere. This is pretty well founded in science now, in research that's done in our universities across the country. And there is no question, when you insert this level of trauma, it's going to bring confusion and fear and profound sadness and disconnect and anger that all play in with the practical realities of your life circumstance now that's been ripped away from you by this violence. So we want to respond in a way that takes into account everything we've learned and everything new that we still have yet to learn about the uniqueness of the community we're trying to support.
Thanks, Steve. Cynthia, do you have anything else you want to say? And then we will open up for questions.
I think I'd really like to hear what questions people have, and maybe as Steve and Jordan and I think of things that we might not have told you, we'll chime in our responses.
Yeah, so I guess if someone has a question, you can unmute yourselves and then we'll kind of go from there.
Since we can't see you all, we don't know. We can't say raise your hand. So Andy?
Hi, thank you. I just want to ask for clarity. I was taking some notes, but Jordan, you had mentioned all 24 victims have received some kind of cash distribution at this point. I want to have you just kind of repeat that information if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so the number just recently increased. So originally when we did our first cash distribution, it was 19 injured and 5 families, but that has gone up by 5 people in terms of the injured. So we just finalized that latest cash distribution for those additional 5. So they'll be getting it soon, but otherwise everyone else has received it. Gotcha.
And do you know, just off the top of your head, how much money has come into the Colorado Healing Fund since this event? Or I know that is a fluid number, but
it's approximately $1.8 million.
Okay.
Just so to clarify, and I know Jordan, you talked about the fact that it takes time for the money that comes through Colorado Gives to actually get to us. It also, we've had some very generous corporate pledges and foundation pledges. Those have not come to us yet either. There's everybody has their process fiscally to distribute funds. So when we give that figure, I want to make sure folks understand that it's not all sitting somewhere in a bank account. A lot of that is not with us yet. Jordan, do you know how much is actually there? I hate to put you on the spot.
No, it's fine. Nothing has hit our bank account yet. So everything that we've given is coming from our seed fund.
So we're borrowing from ourselves right now.
Which is what is, again, critical about the Colorado Healing Fund, because without us being established before an event happens and having a seed fund there, we wouldn't be able to get this money out at this point in time. No other funds are able to get money out as quickly as we are. And I think that's really, really critical with us.
Andy, I just want to add one other thing that Jordan was kind of alluding to earlier. You know, when people get money from these kinds of events and these kinds of services, they can, if it's not done right, impact other resources that they would have available to them. So for instance, if this isn't done properly, they could have a tax liability. If this isn't done properly, they could lose their Medicare or Medicaid or food support help that they're getting. It's a delicate balancing act to make sure that the pieces of the puzzle of the support for folks are done properly and are done in a way that doesn't harm them on the back end.
Thank you. I do have another, but I'll looks like Rob has got his hand raised, so I'll let him go.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure my mic worked. I was just curious, is the Colorado Healing Fund rated by a charity navigator? Do you fall under that category?
I believe we do. I would need to go and double check. I mean, we've been around since 2018, so that's a good question. I personally haven't gone and checked it, but I would believe that we are.
I believe
Okay.
we're also with Check the Charity with that particular tool.
Okay. And then the second question I had, because we've been hearing from a few people in a report on with our news partner, some of the people affected by tragedy saying your group is making decisions about money that victims should be making, but then would you disagree with that sentiment? It sounds like what you've been describing is you give the money to service providers who then give it to victims.
Who wants to take it?
Those are, that's a multiple part question. We do not give money to victims directly because that's how we're incorporated. And it has been shown across the country that the best way to get money from a charitable group to a victim is through someone who is working directly with them, that has a relationship with them. That money is not determined by, that amount is not determined by us based on us telling them what they need. It's simply, at this point, based on need that's been expressed through the victim advocates and through the community, or directly by a victim to a person who's responding. And for the most part, unfortunately, Colorado Springs has had more than one of these events in the last few years. So there are some pretty seasoned people who are down there. Jordan spoke earlier about the advisory that we're looking to create. So when the larger sums of money start to get distributed, we have very clear input from the people closest to the event. And I just respectfully disagree that we are making decisions about how money should spend and who should get what little amount based on some formula that's any different than what I've been describing to you.
Yeah, and one thing I want to emphasize is that we are one fund within this response. We can't be everything to everyone, but we are there for those individuals who are the survivors, the families, and those immediately impacted, and that close community. So we are doing our very best to, as Steve said, work with those advocates who are on the ground, and those folks who are in the community who are best to be able to let us know what those needs are. But also, as I said earlier, we get out a distribution of money that helps support immediate needs, and that's usually in a large chunk of money. And those victim advocates can just start addressing those needs that are coming up. They don't need to come to us for verification on anything. As long as it's something that's not covered by some other fund, it can generally be covered by the Healing Fund money. One thing I wanted to correct really quickly is that we are on GuideStar. So see that there. I guess, Elliot, you can ask, because you haven't asked a question yet.
Yeah, I wondered if donations have slowed at all with the questions coming up about you all's process.
Not really. I mean, there's an ebb and flow when it comes to donations coming in. Usually there's a very fast influx in the first week. We're still getting corporate donations coming in. We haven't had anyone rescind because of the questions about us at all. And yeah, I wouldn't say that anything is slowed because of the conversation around our model. It's just there's been a bit of a slow just because that's generally how the flow of donations go after a mass tragedy. Because since this happened, there were, I think, 7 within that same week. So we just have to recognize that.
Thank you. And then did the critics who brought this concern up come to you all initially to try to talk about this before they spoke out?
No, no one reached out to us. I didn't even know that the press conference was happening. Rob?
I will say that it is not uncommon for the level of communication in the beginning of an event to be very challenging, very difficult. And people have needs, and people have fears, and people have prior concerns that were based on experiences or that they had. And that colors the way they're assuming things are going. I'm very comfortable in saying that there is 100% of altruism in the work of the Colorado Healing Fund. We run a tight ship. We do not do anything with money that is not presented to the community. Our advisory board that we currently have in place, many of them have been through these tragedies in their past, and many of them have responded to these tragedies. There is never any intent to do anything but provide the most possible help based on the corporate and individual giving that we receive. Ken Feinberg, who's a very noted attorney who operates a different format where he uses more of an insurance actuarial approach to things. He once made a statement that I do agree with very closely, and that is, in these kinds of events, there's never going to be enough money given. And so we have to make sure we take care of the most critical needs for as long as we possibly can.
Oh, Andy, you've had your hand up for.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So the impression that I've gotten just from this meeting has been that the way you guys operate, it's primarily you want the victims advocates to be the ones who are kind of that intermediary and finding out from the victims what assistance they might need at any given time. And then you're able to kind of direct those funds through the appropriate service providers and that sort of thing. So is there a message that we should be sharing that kind of help streamline that for you?
I would say, Andy, that what's come apparent to me is that the traditional paths have been working to some degree, but the traditional paths have been barriers for other survivors. And that any way that we can build a path forward to build a link so that communication and relationship can be as solid as possible, as solid as possible, as heartfelt as possible. I know my wife said to me before I came down here that she saw 3 pastors on one of your shows, one of your new shows the other night, that we hadn't spoken to. That, you know, any way we can reach people who can reach people who feel isolated, that's a path we're willing to go down. We want to go down.
But I think the other piece that I want to emphasize, though, is that it is working with those groups. And again, we're working on this advisory committee. We're working on sort of trying to identify more that can reach out to the folks who may not be safe talking to law enforcement. But it is working with those groups to be able to continue to get that money out and best serve the victims themselves. KRDO.
Hi, yes, this is Shelby with KRDO. I just have two quick questions. The first one is, will there ever be a point where you stop taking administration fees once you've raised enough to afford the costs of your operations, and then move forward with giving 100% of the money raised to charities helping the victims? And then if not, what will you do with the extra money if you have budget surplus thanks to the administration fees you collected?
So if, as we said, that we might have a possibility of someone underwriting our admin costs, if that happens, we won't be collecting admin costs off these donations right now. So there won't be a surplus by any means. But again, we're working on that.
But if you reach the administration fees, like the amount that you would need right now, would you give the surplus to that? Like, say that that person doesn't fill your administration fees, how would you work with that?
So we're discussing that internally right now. Cynthia, do you want to speak to that?
I just sort of backing up for one brief second. We have applied to a number of different entities over the period that we've been in existence, seeking administrative and operating costs. It is not something that a lot of folks will cover. And we have to be, as fiduciaries, we have to be responsive to the fact that we need to keep the operations going, whether we're in the middle of a crisis or we're in a nice quiet period where nothing is happening. We are still here. We still have work to do. We do trainings. We participate in panels and conferences to talk about the work we're doing and to assist victims in other ways in that period between things happening. So we don't stop what we're doing. I think I'm understanding your question, and I think that, as Jordan said, we're looking at all options. I would love if we didn't have to take an administrative fee. I really would. Nothing would please me more. So we're exploring several different opportunities, and actually we appreciate the coverage that we're getting from the press, because you help us tell our story about this need. And I have to think, and I hope for this, that someone hears about this and says, gosh, our corporation could help do that. Or we'd like to make a contribution toward those operating costs so that the Healing Fund can give all of the money, pass it on for victim services, not only immediately, but through the mid and long term. So that's my pitch.
And I'd only add to that we don't know, we can't predict how long an event will create demand for services and resources. And so it's not we can point to X number of months from now and say, oh, that one's done. As Jordan said earlier, we have people coming back 5, 10, 15, 20 years later because they are still suffering from some aftermath of trauma. We need to be there for that. We want to be there for that. But if the question is there some reserve we're building up with administrative funds, we have no intent of doing that. We're covering our expenses, period.
Great, thank you. And then my second question is kind of going back to what you were saying earlier. Obviously, I know that this is a small organization, so I don't know how well you could speak to this, but in regards to taking what you said, 30 days for donations to hit your bank accounts, and you're currently using your seed fund, is this a common practice in other organizations? Is that just kind of the process and the legalities and making sure that you're creating a pathway to where that money can get to individuals without any other issues from the government or finances?
I just made a noise because I'm not sure the answer to this. Steve, you looked, if you want to jump in, please feel free while I collect my thoughts.
There are realities to how long it takes for a corporation, say, to give a pledge and then process that pledge. And there is a reality in how long it takes the spot that we use to collect our individual funds before they get that processed through their accounting system and then into our accounting system. That was the beauty of Cynthia creating this initial fund, so we don't have to wait for that to get the money out. And that we will, in a transparent fashion, when those funds are available to us, replace that money in our seed fund so it's there for the next event. But it's a clear and open and transparent accounting that everything in on Colorado Springs is going to Colorado Springs. Everything in on Boulder is going to Boulder. The seed money just allows us to do it with a little bit better dispatch.
Also, I want to point out that we have utilized our seed fund to help with extra support in 2 of the events we've responded to. In the Colorado Springs Mother's Day birthday party tragedy that happened in 2021, we only collected about $32,000. We gave $75,000 because there was that need there, and that was what went out very quickly. But it also is a reflection of us seeing what the needs were through the victim advocates and having to watch what the donations were that were coming in, but making a call based on what the victim advocates were saying to say, look, we're going to give 75 from our seed fund and hope that we get 75 back in donations. And that didn't happen, but that's okay because we have that seed fund there to help. Also in the Denver Lakewood shooting that happened at the end of 2021, I mentioned earlier, but it was $73,000 came in for that. We've given out 82 just because there has been a little bit more of a need there. And we have given as much as we were able to give at that point in time.
Great, thank you.
Well, we're at the top of the hour. I don't know if there's any more questions. Otherwise, we might wrap this up.
I think Telemundo had a question.
Telemundo have a question?
Telemundo, did you have a question? I'm sorry. Maybe I was wrong.
Also, I just wanted to quickly point out, I put in the chat as well a link to our 990, but I know that the IRS has been backed up, and some people have told me this, and I double checked with our financial folks, but they, I have copies of our 990s from 2020 and 2021, so just email me if you'd like that as well. Okay, great.
What about other questions? I want to make sure before we sign off that we've covered what you want to know.
All right. Well, if anything else comes up, please feel free to email me or call me, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. But thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to really understand what the Healing Fund is and how our model works in our mission.
I echo
Thank you.
what Jordan has to say. And if you hear criticisms, something we have not addressed today, it may not have reached our ears, whatever the underlying question is beneath the criticism. And we'd appreciate it if you would reach out to us so that we can address those things. And if there's something happening that we just don't know of or haven't anticipated, you can actually be eyes and ears for us, and we appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.